A tense encounter on the road. Monica Wilson wasn't accustomed to feeling nervous while driving. As a successful lawyer and a well-known advocate for social justice, she carried herself with grace and confidence. But as the sun set over the small, sleepy town of Brentwood, Monica's hands tightened around the steering wheel. The road was quiet, and her mind was still swirling with the emotions that had been haunting her for days. Today was the day she was supposed to meet her estranged father, David Wilson, for the first time since his release from prison. A reunion she had both feared and anticipated for most of her life. Her heart raced as memories of her childhood flashed through her mind. Growing up, Monica had always wondered why her father had been taken away. Why had the justice system failed him? He had always maintained his innocence, but despite his efforts and those of his few supporters, the evidence that could have exonerated him hadn't come to light until it was too late. 25 years of his life, stolen. 25 years of Monica's life, spent without the guiding hand of a father. Why now? Monica whispered to herself. Her heart ached as she considered the long years they'd been apart. There had been milestones she had to face alone. Graduations, new jobs, her first love, her first heartbreak. David had missed it all. And now, after his exoneration, he wanted to see her, to explain. Monica glanced at the address scribbled on the scrap of paper lying on the passenger seat. She was close now, just a few more turns, and she would be face to face with the man she had loved as a child, the man she had longed to hate for so long. Her emotions were a tangled knot of anger, sorrow, and confusion. She couldn't untangle them, so she just drove, faster than she should have. Her heart skipped a beat when she saw flashing blue and red lights in her rearview mirror. At first, Monica thought the police car was simply passing by, but then the unmistakable sound of a siren filled the air. The officer was pulling her over. Monica's heart began to race. Despite her many accomplishments, she was no stranger to the uneasy feeling that crept in when a police car was involved. The stories she had heard, the incidents that had occurred to people in her community, all echoed in her mind. She pulled the car over to the side of the road and glanced in the mirror, catching sight of the officer stepping out of his vehicle. As the officer approached, Monica tried to calm herself. She had done nothing wrong, she reminded herself. Yet her palms were sweaty, and her heart pounded in her chest. She lowered the window as the officer approached. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and wore a pair of mirrored sunglasses that obscured his eyes. His face was stern but unreadable. "License and registration, ma'am," the officer said, his voice clipped but polite. Monica's hands fumbled as she reached for her purse, her nerves making her movements clumsy. She felt the eyes of the officer on her, though she couldn't see them behind his glasses. As she retrieved her license and leaned over to grab the registration from the glove compartment, she prayed for calm. "Here you go, officer," she said, handing over the documents. The officer took the license and glanced at it, his expression remaining neutral, but something changed as he read her name. His demeanor shifted slightly, so subtle that Monica almost missed it. He blinked, his brow furrowing just for a moment before his face returned to its impassive mask. The slight change made Monica's heart skip a beat. "Is something wrong?" Monica asked, trying to keep her voice steady. The officer didn't respond right away. Instead, he stared at the license for a few more seconds before glancing back at Monica. He opened his mouth as if to speak but stopped himself. Something was clearly off. Monica could feel the tension building between them, and it made her uneasy. Without a word, the officer stepped away from her car, walking back towards his patrol vehicle. He didn't return the license or registration, and Monica's anxiety grew with each passing second. She craned her neck to watch him through the side mirror. He was on the radio, speaking with someone, but she couldn't hear what he was saying. Minutes passed, and Monica's nerves began to fray. What was taking so long? She was sure everything was in order. Her mind raced with possibilities. Had something gone wrong with her paperwork? Was her car mistakenly listed as stolen? Her thoughts began to spiral, and soon, the unease she felt grew into full-blown anxiety. After what felt like an eternity, the officer returned to her car. His demeanor had changed again, and Monica could see the tension in his posture. He no longer appeared as composed as he had been when he first approached. There was something about the way he looked at her now that made her feel as if something significant had happened. She just didn't know what. "Ma'am," he began, his voice a little softer this time. "I'm going to need you to step out of the vehicle." Monica's heart dropped. She stared at him, her mind spinning with questions. Why would she need to step out? What was going on? "Why?" she asked, her voice laced with confusion. "What's the issue?" The officer hesitated for a moment, as if weighing his words. Then he said, "We just need to conduct a more thorough check." Monica felt a cold wave of fear wash over her. Something was terribly wrong. She could feel it in her bones. Slowly, she unbuckled her seatbelt and pushed open the car door. The warm evening air hit her like a blast, but it did nothing to calm her nerves. As she stepped out of the car, she caught sight of another officer approaching. He was shorter and looked younger than the first, but his expression was just as serious. The two men exchanged a glance, and Monica could see the gravity of the situation reflected in their eyes. "Please stand over here," the first officer instructed, motioning to a spot on the side of the road. Monica complied, feeling a growing sense of dread. She had no idea what was happening, but the fear of what might come next made her heart race uncontrollably. "Is everything okay?" Monica asked again, her voice barely above a whisper. The officer didn't answer immediately. He looked at her once more, his lips pressing into a thin line before he finally spoke. "There's something about your name, Ms. Wilson," he said slowly. "Something we need to verify." Monica's blood ran cold. What could they possibly need to verify about her name? She wasn't in any trouble, was she? The uncertainty gnawed at her, and she felt as though she was on the edge of a precipice, about to fall into something she couldn't escape. And then, as the officers exchanged another look, Monica realized this was about her father. Unraveling the past. Monica stood beside her car, her pulse pounding in her ears as the two officers exchanged glances. The unease she had felt during the initial moments of the stop had now solidified into something much darker, a sense of impending doom. She could see it in their faces, the flicker of recognition that had passed between them. Something about her name had stirred this reaction, and she knew deep down that it had everything to do with her father, David Wilson. "What do you mean, verify something about my name?" Monica asked, her voice sharp with frustration. She had learned, over the years, how to project confidence even in moments of fear. As a defense attorney, she had faced more intimidating figures in the courtroom than these officers. But right now, standing on the side of a quiet road, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was teetering on the edge of a cliff. Officer Harrison, the taller of the two, hesitated again. His face twitched, and Monica could tell he was uncomfortable. "Ms. Wilson, it's just a routine check. We have some information that we need to clarify, but I assure you, we'll get this sorted quickly." Monica wasn't convinced. "Routine," she scoffed. "You expect me to believe that? You looked at my license, and suddenly everything changed. I'm not moving until you tell me what's going on." The younger officer, whose name tag read Officer Lang, stepped forward. His expression was more sympathetic, though his posture remained rigid. "Ma'am, it's standard procedure. We're going to call in some additional verification, but I promise this is just a formality." Monica's mind raced. She had never been in trouble with the law. In fact, she had spent years defending people who had been wrongfully accused or treated unjustly. She had worked tirelessly to exonerate the innocent, and now here she was, standing in the same shoes as the very clients she had represented. The bitter irony wasn't lost on her. "I don't believe you," Monica said firmly, crossing her arms. "You're not telling me everything. What does my father have to do with this?" At the mention of her father, Officer Harrison's face tightened. It was the smallest of reactions, but Monica noticed. Her intuition was sharp, honed by years of reading people, and she could tell that her father's name had triggered something. "We're just doing our job, ma'am," Officer Harrison said, avoiding her question. Monica's stomach twisted. She had spent so many years defending people from officers just like this, people who believed they were simply doing their job without thinking of the damage they could cause. She had seen it too many times. Officers with their hands tied by bureaucracy, their actions dictated by orders from above. But she wasn't just going to stand by and let them treat her like she was some criminal. "I'm not moving an inch until you explain," Monica said, her voice rising. She could feel the adrenaline pumping through her veins now. "I'm not some naive kid. I know my rights, and I know when someone is hiding something." Officer Lang shifted uncomfortably, but Officer Harrison's expression hardened. "Ma'am, we need you to stay calm and cooperate. This will go much faster if you don't escalate the situation." "Escalate?" Monica's voice cracked with disbelief. "You pull me over for no reason, refuse to tell me why, and now you're talking about escalation. What exactly do you think I'm going to do?" The silence between them grew thicker, like the calm before a storm. Monica could feel her frustration boiling over, but she knew that losing control wouldn't help her situation. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. She needed to think clearly, to act rationally, no matter how unnerving this situation was becoming. Then, in the distance, she saw another patrol car approaching. Its lights weren't flashing, but it was moving with purpose. Monica's stomach sank even further. This wasn't just a random stop. Something much bigger was happening. As the car pulled up, a third officer stepped out. A woman this time, with sharp features and an air of authority. Her badge read Sergeant Miller, and as soon as she approached, both Harrison and Lang straightened up. It was clear she outranked them. "Sergeant," Officer Harrison greeted her, his voice more deferential than it had been with Monica. He handed her Monica's license, and the sergeant glanced at it briefly before turning her gaze to Monica. "Ms. Wilson," Sergeant Miller began, her tone measured, "we've had a situation come up regarding your identity. We're still sorting through some details, but it would help if you came down to the station with us to clear things up." Monica's heart skipped a beat. Go to the station? What on earth was happening? "I'm not going anywhere until you explain why," Monica said, refusing to back down. "I've done nothing wrong, and I'm not going to let you take me in without an explanation." Sergeant Miller sighed, glancing at Officer Harrison and Lang, as if debating how much to tell her. Then, turning back to Monica, she said, "It's about your father." Monica's blood ran cold. She had known it. From the moment Officer Harrison's face had shifted when he looked at her license, she had known her father was at the heart of this. But what could they possibly want with him now? He had already served time for a crime he hadn't committed, and he had only just been released after years of legal battles to clear his name. "My father?" Monica asked, her voice wavering slightly despite her best efforts to remain calm. "What about him?" Sergeant Miller hesitated for a moment, then said, "There are some loose ends from his case that have come to light. We need to make sure everything is in order, and that includes verifying the information we have on you. It's a precaution, but it's important." Monica's mind was spinning. Loose ends? What could that even mean? After all these years, her father's case had been settled. He had been wrongfully convicted, and the evidence that had cleared his name had been undeniable. What more could they possibly need? "Are you saying you think I'm involved in something?" Monica asked, her voice sharp again. "Because if this is about me, you'd better be ready with some solid proof." "No, Ms. Wilson," Sergeant Miller replied quickly. "This isn't about accusing you of anything, but there are some questions about your father's release that we need to clarify, and your name came up in connection with some of those inquiries." Monica's heart sank even further. This wasn't about her. It was about David Wilson, her father, the man who had spent 25 years behind bars for a crime he didn't commit. And now, after finally being exonerated, there were still people questioning his freedom. It wasn't fair. It wasn't right. "My father has paid enough," Monica said through clenched teeth. He's been through hell. And so have I. If this is about trying to drag his name through the mud again, I'm not going to stand for it." Sergeant Miller held up a hand, trying to calm her. "Ms. Wilson, I understand how difficult this must be. But this is just about getting clarity. We're not here to reopen old wounds. We need to make sure everything about his release was handled properly." Monica stared at the officer, her mind racing. She didn't trust this explanation, not fully. But she also knew that standing on the side of the road, fighting with these officers, wasn't going to get her anywhere. If there was a way to clear this up quickly and get back to the business of seeing her father, she had to consider it. "All right," Monica said slowly. "I'll come down to the station. But this had better be quick. I have somewhere important to be." Sergeant Miller nodded, seemingly relieved that Monica wasn't going to resist further. "It shouldn't take long. We'll get you in and out." As the officers escorted her back to her car, Monica couldn't shake the feeling that something much bigger was at play. This was more than just a routine check, and she was determined to get to the bottom of it. What had her father's release stirred up? And why was she suddenly caught in the middle of it? Secrets beneath the surface. The ride to the station was a silent one. Monica sat in the backseat of Sergeant Miller's patrol car, her eyes fixed on the passing scenery as her mind churned. The quiet streets of Brentwood blurred around her as dusk settled over the town, casting long shadows over everything. Inside the car, the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. The air conditioning hummed softly, but it did little to calm the storm of emotions swirling in Monica's chest. She glanced at her reflection in the window, the dim light illuminating the hard lines of her face. She had built her life around control, controlling her emotions, her career, and her path through life. Yet here she was, being dragged into something she didn't understand, something that had shaken her sense of stability. Her mind kept racing back to her father. Why now, after all these years? Why was his name still a point of contention when he had already suffered more than enough? Sergeant Miller's voice broke the silence. "We'll get this cleared up as quickly as possible, Ms. Wilson. I know it's frustrating, but we're just following up on some irregularities." "Irregularities?" Monica echoed bitterly, not turning her head from the window. "What kind of irregularities?" Miller hesitated for a moment, her hands gripping the steering wheel a little tighter. "There were some concerns raised after your father's release, some details that don't quite add up. We're just trying to make sure everything is in order." Monica's chest tightened. Her father's release had been a long, hard-fought battle, one that had dragged on for years. After decades of wrongful imprisonment, he had finally been exonerated when new evidence surfaced. But now, to hear there were still irregularities felt like a slap in the face. It was as though the world refused to let him go free. "Don't tell me you're reopening his case," Monica said coldly. "He's already been proven innocent. What more could you possibly want?" Miller glanced at her through the rearview mirror, her eyes betraying a flicker of uncertainty. "No, we're not reopening anything. But there are some loose ends that we need to tie up, and your name came up during that process." Monica's frustration deepened. "My name? What does that have to do with anything?" Miller didn't answer right away. Instead, she turned her focus back to the road, navigating through the quiet streets with practiced ease. Monica could tell the sergeant wasn't eager to divulge more details just yet, which only heightened her unease. Soon, they arrived at the police station. It was a modest building, unremarkable in its design, with a few cars parked outside and a single streetlight casting a dim glow over the entrance. Monica stepped out of the patrol car and followed Miller inside, her pulse quickening with each step. Inside the station, the sterile fluorescent lighting and the hum of activity hit Monica like a wave. Officers moved about, talking in low tones, while the occasional beep of a phone or radio punctuated the stillness. Miller led her down a hallway to a small windowless room that looked like it had been hastily repurposed as an interrogation room. "Have a seat," Miller said, gesturing to a chair at the small table in the center of the room. Monica sat down, her spine straight, trying to keep her composure. She was no stranger to police stations or interrogation rooms, having defended many clients from situations just like this. But sitting on the other side of the table, as the subject of scrutiny, was unsettling in a way she hadn't expected. Minutes passed in silence as Monica waited for whatever was coming next. Finally, the door opened, and another officer stepped in. A man Monica didn't recognize, with a slightly disheveled appearance and tired eyes. He carried a folder in his hand and greeted Miller with a nod before turning to Monica. "Ms. Wilson," he said, his tone formal but not unkind. "I'm Lieutenant Gregson. I understand this must be a bit confusing, and I want to assure you that we're just trying to clear up some confusion. We've been reviewing some aspects of your father's release, and we need your help." Monica narrowed her eyes. "My help? How exactly can I help with that?" Gregson opened the folder and pulled out a stack of papers, laying them on the table between them. Monica leaned forward slightly, trying to get a look at what was written, but the pages were covered with dense text and legal jargon she couldn't immediately decipher. "The truth is, Ms. Wilson," Gregson began, "there's more to your father's case than what was made public. During the investigation, certain files were sealed, and some information was withheld for reasons that go beyond a simple wrongful conviction." Monica's heart skipped a beat. "What are you talking about?" Gregson exchanged a glance with Sergeant Miller before continuing. "We believe your father was involved in something much larger than anyone realized at the time of his arrest. Something that, until now, has been kept under wraps." Monica's chest tightened with a mix of anger and disbelief. She had spent years poring over every detail of her father's case, searching for any evidence that could help exonerate him. But she had never come across anything that suggested his situation was tied to something deeper. "You're telling me that after all these years, there's more to the story?" Monica asked, her voice thick with skepticism. "And I'm just now hearing about it." Gregson nodded solemnly. "We weren't at liberty to disclose this information before. It was classified at the highest level, and even now, we're only able to reveal certain details. But the fact that your father's name came up in connection with a classified investigation is part of why we're reviewing everything so carefully." Monica stared at him, her mind racing. What could her father possibly have been involved in? She knew the system had failed him, had treated him unjustly, but this was beyond anything she had ever imagined. "What kind of investigation?" Monica asked, her voice quieter now, filled with unease. Gregson hesitated for a moment before leaning forward, lowering his voice as if sharing a secret that no one else could hear. "Your father, David Wilson, was wrongfully convicted, yes. But before his arrest, he was part of a covert operation, one that we believe involved corruption at the highest levels of law enforcement. His wrongful conviction wasn't just a mistake, it was part of a cover-up." Monica's blood ran cold. A cover-up. Her father had never mentioned anything like this, not in all the years they had talked, not in any of the court documents or testimonies. She had always believed his arrest had been a tragic error, a gross miscarriage of justice. But now, to hear that it might have been deliberate, calculated by those in power, made her head spin. "You're telling me my father was set up?" Monica asked, her voice trembling. "For what? What was this operation?" Gregson exchanged another glance with Miller before answering. "It involved several high-ranking officials, some of whom are still in power today. Your father was working as an undercover informant, investigating a network of corruption that spanned multiple agencies. When he got too close, they took him down." Monica felt like the ground had been ripped out from under her. Why wasn't this ever brought up in court? Why didn't anyone fight harder to clear his name? Gregson sighed. The evidence was buried. Those involved had too much to lose, and they made sure that anyone who could help your father was silenced or discredited. By the time your father's case came to light, most of the people who could testify in his defense were either dead, disappeared, or too afraid to speak out. Monica's hands clenched into fists. The system had failed her father in ways she couldn't have imagined. And now, here she was, being dragged back into the web of deceit and corruption that had stolen his life. "Why now?" Monica asked, her voice low. "Why are you bringing this up after all these years?" Gregson leaned back in his chair, his expression somber. "Because, Ms. Wilson, the investigation isn't over. And we believe that the people who set your father up are still out there, still operating in the shadows. Your name came up because of some recent developments. We need your help to bring them down." Monica stared at him, her heart pounding in her chest. She had spent her entire career fighting for justice, for people who had been wronged by the system. But now, it seemed, the fight was far from over. Caught between justice and danger, Monica sat frozen in her seat, her mind struggling to process the whirlwind of revelations that had just been laid before her. The weight of what Lieutenant Gregson had said pressed heavily on her chest, each word sinking deeper and deeper. Her father, David Wilson, hadn't just been a victim of a wrongful conviction. He had been caught in a web of corruption so vast and intricate that even after his release, its tendrils still reached out, threatening to ensnare her now. The room felt suffocating, the air thick with unspoken truths. Monica's pulse raced, her body instinctively wanting to run, but she knew there was no escaping this. Not now. She leaned forward, her elbows resting on the table, her eyes narrowing as she tried to steady her breathing. "You want me to help you?" she asked, her voice barely concealing the incredulity and frustration that churned within her. "You come to me with this story, this insane story about my father, and now you expect me to just fall in line and play along. Why should I trust you?" Lieutenant Gregson met her gaze evenly, but Monica could see the strain in his features. "I understand how this must sound, Ms. Wilson. I truly do. But we're not asking you to trust us blindly. We're asking you to help us uncover the truth, for your father's sake. For your sake. If we don't put a stop to this, you could be in serious danger." "Danger?" Monica's voice rose, sharp and unyielding. "How exactly am I in danger? My father was exonerated. His case is closed. What could possibly still be out there that threatens me?" Sergeant Miller, who had remained quiet until now, stepped forward, her expression grim. "The people your father was investigating. They never stopped. They went underground, but their influence is still very real and very dangerous. We believe they've been monitoring his release and, by extension, you. They're not done tying up loose ends." Monica's stomach twisted in knots. She had never imagined that her father's wrongful conviction was part of something this large. She had fought for years to clear his name, never realizing the full scope of the corruption she was up against. And now, after everything, she was being told that her life could be at risk because of the very people who had destroyed his. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "This is insane," she muttered, running a hand through her hair. "You can't just walk in here and tell me my father was part of some covered investigation and expect me to believe it. Where's the proof? Where's the evidence?" Gregson remained calm, though his gaze sharpened. "We have documents, classified ones, that detail your father's involvement. His work as an informant was kept under wraps to protect him, but the higher-ups got wind of what he was doing, and they framed him before he could expose them. We've uncovered some of these documents, but others are still hidden, sealed by people who don't want the truth to come out." Monica crossed her arms, her jaw clenched. "If you've known about this for so long, why didn't you do anything? Why wait until now, until after he's been released, to bring this to light?" Gregson sighed, the frustration evident in his voice. "We didn't have all the pieces back then. And even now, we're working against forces that are far more powerful than you can imagine. There are people who don't want this case reopened, people who will stop at nothing to keep their secrets buried." Monica's head spun. She had spent years building a life based on justice, on exposing the truth, and now she was being told that the very system she had fought within was still hiding something monumental. And not just hiding it, actively covering it up, even at the expense of her father's freedom. Her anger flared again. So what now? You want me to just jump into the middle of this conspiracy? What exactly are you asking me to do? Gregson exchanged another glance with Sergeant Miller before leaning forward, his voice low and serious. We believe that the people involved in your father's setup are still operating in positions of power. They've gone underground, but their network is still intact. We've managed to gather some intel, but we need more. Your father's release has stirred things up, and they've been watching you closely. We want you to help us expose them. Monica blinked, stunned. Expose them? How? I'm a lawyer, not an undercover agent. What could I possibly do that you haven't already tried? Gregson leaned back, considering his words carefully. Your connection to your father puts you in a unique position. These people know who you are, and they'll be watching your every move. We're hoping that by working with us, you can help us lure them out, get them to make a mistake. Monica's heart raced, her mind racing through the implications of what Gregson was asking. You want me to be bait? Sergeant Miller interjected, her tone soft but firm. We wouldn't put you in direct danger. You'd be protected every step of the way. But yes, we need you to play a role, one that could help us take down the people who destroyed your father's life. Monica sank back into her chair, her thoughts swirling in a chaotic storm. She had spent so many years fighting to be free of the shadow of her father's wrongful conviction, and now she was being asked to step back into that darkness. But this time, it wasn't just about her father. It was about exposing a network of corruption that had likely ruined countless other lives. Her eyes locked with Gregson's, searching for any hint of deception, any sign that he was leading her into something she couldn't control. But all she saw was the same grim determination she had seen in herself countless times in the courtroom. He wasn't lying. This was real. Still, the weight of the decision pressed down on her. If she agreed, she would be stepping into a world of danger, a world where the people watching her were capable of anything. But if she refused, the truth about her father's life, the full truth, might never come to light. Do you really think this will work? Monica asked, her voice quieter now, almost hesitant. Gregson nodded. We do. And we wouldn't ask you if we didn't think it was the best chance we had. But the decision is yours. Monica's heart pounded in her chest as the enormity of the situation settled in. She had spent so long seeking justice for others, but now justice for her own family hung in the balance. If she said no, she could walk away and never look back. But could she live with that? Could she live with the knowledge that the people who had stolen her father's life might still be out there, untouchable? She took a deep breath, her mind made up. All right, she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil she felt inside. I'll help you, but we do this my way. And no more secrets. Gregson's expression softened with relief. Agreed. We'll work together on this. We'll keep you informed every step of the way. Sergeant Miller gave her a nod, the faintest hint of a smile tugging at the corner of her lips. You're doing the right thing, Monica. This will bring the truth to light. Monica didn't reply. Instead, she stood, feeling the weight of the decision settle over her like a heavy cloak. She had no idea what dangers lay ahead, but one thing was certain. There was no turning back now. She was going to get to the bottom of this, no matter the cost. Into the shadows, Monica could barely recognize herself in the reflection staring back at her in the mirror. The strong, confident lawyer who had built her reputation on truth and justice now stood in the bathroom of a safe house, her stomach tight with anxiety. Gone were her polished professional suits, replaced by a casual outfit designed to help her blend in. She had spent the last few days trying to wrap her mind around what she had agreed to. And now, the reality was setting in. She wasn't just stepping into danger for herself. She was stepping into a dark world, one that had nearly destroyed her father and could very well destroy her too. The safe house was a nondescript suburban home, tucked away in a quiet neighborhood far enough from town that Monica felt removed from her usual life. She had been brought here after agreeing to help Sergeant Miller and Lieutenant Gregson with their operation. They had told her it was for her protection, to keep her safe while they set the wheels in motion for their plan. But as the hours passed, the isolation began to gnaw at her. She left the bathroom and wandered into the living room, the stillness of the house unsettling her nerves. It had been 2 days since she had agreed to their plan, and so far, nothing had happened. She was restless, her mind filled with questions that had no immediate answers. What exactly did they expect her to do? How long would this take? And how much danger was she really in? A knock at the door startled her, and she instinctively tensed. She wasn't expecting anyone. Gregson had told her that if she received visitors, it would only be officers from his team. But this knock felt different, firm, deliberate. Monica took a deep breath, steeling herself as she approached the door. When she opened it, her breath caught. Standing there was a man she hadn't seen in over a decade. A face from her past, one that she thought she'd buried along with the painful memories of her father's trial. He wore a leather jacket, his sharp features just as she remembered them, though his eyes held a hardness now that hadn't been there before. "Monica," the man said, his voice low and smooth. "It's been a long time." Monica stared at him, her heart pounding. "Carter, what are you doing here?" Carter Jennings. He had been a young, ambitious attorney working for the state's prosecution team back when her father was first arrested. She had hated him then, hated the way he had relentlessly pursued her father's conviction, driven by ambition rather than truth. Over the years, she had tried to forget him, but seeing him now brought all the bitterness back to the surface. "Can I come in?" he asked, his voice measured, as though he wasn't sure how she would react. Monica hesitated for a moment, but then stepped aside, allowing him into the safe house. As he entered, she could feel the tension between them, the unspoken history that hung in the air like a weight they both carried. "What are you doing here?" Monica asked again, her voice sharper this time. "I thought you were done with my family after what you did to my father." Carter turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "I was wrong, Monica. About everything. I didn't know it back then, but your father was set up. I've been working for years to uncover the truth." Monica's jaw tightened. "You expect me to believe that? After you helped put him away?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I know I'm the last person you want to see right now, but you need to understand. I was a pawn in all of this. I didn't know the full extent of what was happening. None of us did. But when I found out, I couldn't let it go." Monica's mind raced. She wanted to scream at him, to throw him out of the house and slam the door behind him. But something about the way he was looking at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of regret and determination, stopped her. "So what now?" she asked, crossing her arms. "You come here to absolve yourself of your guilt, to make peace." Carter shook his head. "No, I'm here because you're in danger, and I need to help you." Monica let out a harsh laugh. "Danger? That's the understatement of the year. I've been told that my life is at risk because of what my father was involved in. And now you're telling me you're part of this mess too." Carter's face darkened. "There's more to this than you know, Monica. It goes deeper than just your father's wrongful conviction. The people who set him up, they're part of a larger network. And they're watching you now because they think you have information that could expose them." Monica's heart sank. "What information?" Carter took a step closer, his eyes locked on hers. "They think your father left something behind, something that could bring them down. They're looking for it, and they think you know where it is." Monica stared at him, her mind reeling. "That's ridiculous. My father never told me anything about this. I don't know where he kept his files or what he might have had." Carter nodded. "That's what they're banking on, that you don't know. But they're watching, waiting for any slip-up. If you find something, they'll come for you." Monica felt a cold chill run down her spine. "Why would my father hide something like that from me?" "Probably to protect you," Carter said softly. "He knew how dangerous these people were. He wouldn't have wanted you involved. But now, you're already in the middle of it." Monica sank into a chair, her mind spinning. Everything she had thought she understood about her father's case was unraveling before her eyes. He had been trying to protect her all along. And now, even after his exoneration, she was at risk. "So what do we do?" Monica asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Carter crouched down in front of her, his expression serious. "We need to find whatever it is your father left behind. Documents, files, anything that could expose these people. And we need to do it before they get to you." Monica swallowed hard, her throat dry. "You're asking me to dig up secrets I didn't even know existed. I'm asking you to help me finish what your father started," Carter said. "He fought for the truth, and now it's up to us to make sure it comes to light." Monica's mind raced. Could she trust Carter? Could she really rely on the man who had once worked to convict her father? But the desperation in his eyes told her that he wasn't the same man she had known back then. He had been fighting his own battle all these years, just like she had. After a long moment of silence, Monica stood up, her resolve hardening. "All right," she said, her voice steady. "We'll find the truth. But if you cross me, if you lie to me, I swear I'll make sure you regret it." Carter nodded, standing as well. "Fair enough." Monica's heart pounded in her chest as she realized the magnitude of what she was about to do. She was about to dive headfirst into a conspiracy that spanned decades, a fight her father had started long before she had even understood what was at stake. But this time, she wasn't alone. And this time, she was ready to finish what had been left undone. The final betrayal. The weight of the truth pressed heavily on Monica as she and Carter made their way through the quiet, winding streets of her father's old neighborhood. Night had fallen, casting long shadows across the cracked sidewalks and dim streetlights. The urgency of their mission pulsed in her veins. Her father had hidden something that could bring down the powerful people who had destroyed his life. But they had no idea what it was, or where it might be. Carter had spent the last few hours briefing Monica on the extent of the conspiracy they were up against. It wasn't just a handful of corrupt officers or officials. This was a network that spanned multiple states, involving law enforcement, politicians, and even corporate interests. Her father had gotten too close to exposing them, and they had retaliated by framing him. But now, with his release, they feared he had left behind evidence that could destroy them once and for all. The drive was tense, filled with unspoken fears. They were heading to her father's old workshop, a small garage on the outskirts of the city that had been left untouched since his wrongful conviction. Monica had been there only once as a child, when her father had proudly shown her his collection of woodworking tools and half-finished projects. But now, it seemed the workshop might hold the key to everything. As they approached the rundown building, Monica's stomach churned with a mixture of anticipation and dread. The garage looked as forgotten as ever, its paint peeling, the windows grimy with dust. But there was an eerie stillness to the air that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. "We're here," Carter said quietly, cutting the engine. He glanced at her, his expression somber. "Are you ready?" Monica nodded, though her heart raced. "Let's do this." They stepped out of the car, and the silence of the night swallowed them whole. Monica's senses were on high alert as they approached the garage door. The creak of the rusted hinges echoed in the stillness as Carter pushed it open, revealing the dimly lit interior. The faint smell of sawdust still lingered in the air, mixed with the scent of neglect. Monica's eyes swept the room, taking in the old workbench, the shelves lined with tools, and the stack of boxes piled in the corner. This was her father's sanctuary once, a place where he had poured his energy into creating, into building something with his hands. It was strange to think that this same place could also hold the evidence that might destroy the people who had taken everything from him. "We need to search everything," Carter said, breaking the silence. "If your father left something behind, it's probably hidden well." Monica nodded, moving toward the stack of boxes. She began sifting through the contents, old documents, notebooks filled with her father's handwriting, and tools that looked like they hadn't been touched in years. Her mind raced as she tried to imagine where her father might have hidden something so important. "What exactly are we looking for?" she asked, glancing over at Carter, who was rummaging through the shelves. "Anything that looks out of place," he replied. "A file, a hidden compartment, even a notebook with unusual entries. Your father knew he was being watched, so he would have been careful." Monica's hands trembled as she sorted through the papers. Memories of her father flooded her mind. His deep laugh, his kind eyes, the way he used to teach her how to hold a hammer as if it were the most important skill in the world. And then, the memories turned darker. The sound of the police knocking on their door that fateful night, the sight of her father being led away in handcuffs, his face a mixture of shock and fear. The years she had spent trying to understand what had happened, trying to reconcile the man she knew with the accusations that had been leveled against him. She pushed the thoughts aside and focused on the task at hand. They needed to find something, anything, that could tie the pieces together. After nearly an hour of searching, frustration began to creep in. Every box, every shelf, seemed to yield nothing but ordinary items, tools, old receipts, and broken gadgets. Monica felt a growing sense of desperation. What if they were too late? What if someone had already found whatever her father had hidden? Suddenly, Carter spoke up. "Monica, come here." She turned, her heart skipping a beat. Carter was standing by the workbench, his hand resting on a drawer that was slightly ajar. There was something about the way the drawer sat, just a little uneven, as if it had been tampered with. "What is it?" she asked, crossing the room. "I think there's a false bottom," Carter said, pulling the drawer open further. He ran his fingers along the inside of the drawer, feeling for any irregularities. After a moment, there was a soft click, and a small panel at the bottom of the drawer popped loose. Monica's heart pounded in her chest as Carter carefully removed the panel, revealing a slim leather-bound journal hidden beneath it. "This must be it," Carter said, handing the journal to her. Monica's fingers trembled as she took the journal and opened it. Inside were pages filled with her father's meticulous handwriting. But these weren't the typical notes she had seen in his other notebooks. These were detailed accounts, names, dates, and places. It was a record of everything her father had uncovered during his investigation, evidence of the corruption he had been trying to expose. As Monica flipped through the pages, her breath caught. Her father had been investigating a powerful group of people, law enforcement officials, politicians, even business leaders who had been involved in illegal dealings. There were references to drug trafficking, bribery, and cover-ups that spanned years. And it was all laid out in this journal, a detailed map of the conspiracy that had ultimately led to her father's downfall. "This is it," she whispered. "This is what they were afraid of." Carter looked over her shoulder, his expression grim. "This is enough to bring them all down. If we can get this into the right hands, they won't be able to hide anymore." Monica's mind raced. They had found the evidence, but now what? They couldn't just walk into the police station with it, not when so many of the people involved were still in power. They needed a plan, and they needed to act fast. Just as she was about to speak, the faint sound of footsteps reached her ears. Monica's blood turned to ice. She exchanged a glance with Carter, both of them realizing the same thing at the same moment. They weren't alone. Carter moved quickly, shutting the drawer and motioning for Monica to stay quiet. The two of them crouched behind the workbench, their hearts pounding in unison. The footsteps grew louder, echoing through the garage. Monica's mind raced. Had they been followed? Was it someone from Gregson's team, or was it someone else? Someone who knew exactly what they were after. The door creaked open, and through the gap in the workbench, Monica saw a pair of black boots step inside. Her breath caught. Whoever it was, they were moving slowly, methodically, as if searching for something or someone. Carter's hand rested on her shoulder, a silent signal to stay calm. But Monica's heart was hammering so loudly in her chest that she was sure whoever was in the room could hear it. The seconds stretched into agonizing minutes as the intruder moved around the garage, inspecting the shelves, the boxes, the workbench. Then there was a voice, low and menacing. "I know you're in here, Monica." Monica's blood ran cold. She recognized that voice. It was Lieutenant Gregson. Carter's grip tightened on her shoulder, his eyes widening in shock. Monica felt the world tilt on its axis. Gregson had betrayed them. Gregson's footsteps echoed in the small garage as he continued speaking, his tone mocking. "Did you really think you could outsmart us? Your father didn't. He thought he could bring us down, too. But we're still here, aren't we?" Monica's heart pounded as she struggled to make sense of what she was hearing. Gregson had been part of it all along. He hadn't been trying to expose the conspiracy. He had been working to protect it. Carter's eyes met hers, a silent understanding passing between them. They had to get out. Now. But before they could move, Gregson's voice sharpened. "You have something that belongs to me, Monica. And if you hand it over, maybe we can forget this ever happened." Monica's mind raced. She couldn't let Gregson have the journal. It was the only thing that could bring him and the others down. But how could they escape? Carter motioned toward the back door of the garage, his movements slow and deliberate. Monica nodded, clutching the journal tightly to her chest. They would have to make a run for it. But just as they were about to move, Gregson stepped closer, his gun drawn, his eyes scanning the room. "I'm not going to ask again." Monica's heart pounded in her ears as she realized they had no choice. They had to fight. With a sudden burst of adrenaline, Carter lunged forward, knocking over a stack of boxes and creating a distraction. Monica bolted for the back door, her pulse racing as Gregson shouted after them. The night air hit her like a cold slap as she and Carter sprinted into the darkness. Behind them, Gregson's voice echoed through the night, but Monica didn't look back. She clutched the journal tightly, knowing that everything, her father's legacy, the truth, her own safety, depended on getting it into the right hands. They had found the truth. Now, they just had to survive long enough to expose it.